You know, we I'll be the only one speaking to you today. So I told McKinnon, I was like, I'm going to get us out of there before 2 o'clock. And of course, I'm kidding, but we're going to start off by turning to the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1. And I was typing this up, and full of envy. Full of envy. That's what I saved this as. And when we go to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1, and it says, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any creature in the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, It is true that God hath said, You shall not eat of any tree of the garden. And the woman said to the serpent, We may freely eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has indeed said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, In dying, you shall not surely die." And you stop there and you think about that in verse 3. God told him not to eat it, but he also said, don't even touch it. And you think about that a lot of times with temptations that we have, to consume something. But then even sometimes what God even put the barrier up here, he was like, don't even get near it. Don't even touch it. Because the temptation there. And picking back up in verse 4, "And the serpent said to the woman, In dying, you shall not surely die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be open, and you shall be like God, deciding good and evil." What you really think about here is Satan was not really lying to them. Their eyes were going to be open to good and evil. And they were going to get to decide what was good and evil from their vantage point. We know that God is really the only one that decides what is right and what is wrong. But think about how that compares today to people today. People have their own, they'll say, that's my truth. People were very quick, well, this is what I believe, or what I believe, or don't believe. And really what we need to be concerned with is, what does God say? And so, "For God knows the day that you eat it, your eyes will be open, and you shall be like gods, deciding good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasing to the eyes, and a tree to be desired, make one wise, she took of its fruit, and she ate, and she also gave it to her husband, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked." So they immediately knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. And they heard the sound of the Lord of God walking in the garden of the cool day. And then Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. We've read this many times, but it's still a lot of substance in these few verses we read. The serpent, Adam and Eve, the eating fruit of disobedience. The fact that today you and I will pray to God, we can't see God, but there was a time where God was walking in the garden with them. And you look back and you go all the way back to Genesis, and who hid from who first? We hid from God first because we chose poorly. And Adam, we can read these verses many times and we can wonder, why did he do that? Why did they eat of that fruit? That was just the only thing they didn't have to do. Why did they do it? And they did it anyway. But reality kicks in. If Ben Franklin would have been in the Garden of Eden, Ben Franklin would have eaten that fruit. Adam and Eve were a representative of you and I. And you and I are not perfect. And so regardless if it was Adam and Eve, or if it was, Bob and Sarah, or whatever name you want to come up with, this mistake would have taken place. And, how many times in your life have you been pulled to do something that you know isn't good for you, right? But you do it anyway. I would like to look at things, from a different vantage point today. A few weeks ago, I was walking in my neighborhood, and I saw a shooting star. And no sooner than I saw it, it was gone. I mean, a millisecond. And you think about that, in that millisecond, there is no telling how far that star traveled. Millions of miles, I'm just guessing. But a huge distance. And it was gone, no quicker than I saw it. And the second that happened, I saw it going from the east to the west, and it was so quick. And when we watch things like that, we're reminded of just how powerful God is. Let's go to Psalms chapter 8. And in Psalms chapter 8, in verse 4, we'll read a familiar scripture that we've read many times. And let's see here. Read the one where David is speaking, and Psalms chapter 8, verse 4. And it's just a simple question that he had. And he said, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you even care for him?" You know, if you take off in a plane, you don't have to go very high before things start looking so small. And when you look at the universe and you look at the planets and everything, we are so small. So small. And why does God even care? You know, obviously he made us, but he also made the universe. He made things that are a lot larger than us. Why is God mindful of us? He created the universe. He created everything around us. When is the last time you sat down and you just listened to the wind? You listen to the things that he created that you can't even see, but you can feel. That's how powerful he is. God's creation is all around us, and David was asking the question, why are you mindful of us? And I believe that's a great question. You know, you have a conflict in your life, maybe an argument or something like that, and then you realize it's really not that important. It's really not that important. Had dinner with some people last night, and one of the individuals is a paramedic. And he brought up the fact that, you know, you can be upset about this or that, but earlier in the week, or I think it might have been 2 weeks ago, he actually went on a call where I think it was a 12-year-old boy had hung himself. And he was able to pull the boy down and resuscitate him and save his life. And that kind of thing puts things in order of whether or not I got some lint on my jacket or not, right? It's not really that big of a deal, is it? Why is God mindful of us? Well, you know, what happened in the Garden of Eden wasn't just a test for Adam and Eve. It was the first of many lessons for someone else that was full of envy. And I wrote down the definition of envy. It's a feeling of discontent and resentment aroused by and in conjunction with the desire for the possession of qualities of another. Who else is learning a lesson? Who else? Let's go to Revelations chapter 12. Revelations chapter 12 and verse 7. And obviously we look at Adam and Eve, and we know what they did that was incorrect in the Garden of Eden. And they had to live with that mistake. They ended up getting kicked out of the garden. You know, we know that thorns and weeds began to come up. I mean, I love working in my yard. And I hate weeds. I can't stand them. And I have my dad's lime tree. And it's not, you know, producing fruit right now because we're in the winter, but it's got some thorns on it that will light you up. And I remember my dad, you know, he was on all kinds of blood thinners and stuff. And I mean, if he just barely nicked one, I mean, you would have thought he was shot or something. You'd have to cover him up. And I mean, he'd always have bruises on him. But you think about that. There was no thorns, no weeds until after Adam and Eve did what they did. You don't think about stuff like that, but it changed the whole chemistry of the whole world. It changed everything, not just them. It changed his creation. And in Revelations chapter 12 and verse 7, we read about a war that took place. And it says, there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels warred against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels warred. But they did not prevail, neither was their place found in any more in heaven. And the great dragon, and this is Satan, was cast out, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, who is deceiving the whole world. He was cast down to the earth, and his angels were cast down with him. So the result of this battle was that Satan and his demons no longer had a place in heaven. And you think a place, that's a position. They didn't have a place there anymore. He lost his place. And why did he lose his place? Because of envy. Because he wanted to be something that he wasn't. He wanted to put himself in a power position that was not his to be put into. And I'm not going to flip to these scriptures, but Satan was beautiful. Beautiful. And I know that today we depict Satan as this, you know, pitchfork and the red. No. If you or I actually was able to see Satan, we would probably fall in love with the way that he is. He's one of the most beautiful angels that God ever created. He's the prince and power of the air, which means he had, when you read about him, he had like these horns on him and what have you. He made beautiful music. There's no telling what kind of ways that he could mesmerize or deceive people. And that's what he does. That's what he's doing now. And, you know, have you ever had or know someone that loses their position? Maybe you know somebody you work with that got demoted or lost their job or something. They lost a position. Now, obviously, there's a sad part to that. We don't want anybody to lose their job or anything like that. But we're talking about on a much larger scale here. Satan lost his position in heaven, and he was thrown to this earth, no longer having that position. And, you know, you and I just go on about our business, but he didn't. He's not happy about losing that position. He wants that position back. And that's what he's trying to accomplish. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5. Satan lost his position in heaven. There was a war. He was cast here to the earth. And now he's taking it out on you and I. And he does it every day. And you know what? He does a really good job at it. It's not a good thing he's doing, but the thing that he does really good at, right? And in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, we read, "Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil." You can read over that real quickly. He is your adversary. He's not your friend. He is your enemy. He may make himself appear as your friend, but he's really your enemy. He is your adversary. And what does it say? The devil is prowling about as a roaring lion, seeking anyone that he may devour. And why? Because he lost his position. And because for whatever reason, in his mind, you are the reason for that. You and I are the reason for that. And that's a very frightening thing. I don't know if you've watched, I know, I can probably guess you have. But at one point or another, we've all watched a movie where, you know, someone's either walking to their car and, like, you know, you're seeing from the villain standpoint, they're watching the person, you know, maybe they're about to do something bad to them, or you watched a scary movie and there's someone looking through people's windows or something. And we can all relate to that, and it's frightening. You go to a scary movie and you think, oh man, there's somebody following these people around looking to kill them or hurt them. You and I are living that every day. And I've said this before, Satan, he's the master serial killer. He hates each and every one of you and myself. And he's constantly doing exactly what we just read here in Peter. He's prowling about as a roaring lion. What is a roaring lion looking for? He's looking for food. And so we have to keep that in perspective, that he's our adversary, that he's our enemy. And what threat are you and I? Why are we to be considered an adversary? We go back to that question. David said, why are you even mindful of us? Well, you could ask that same question to Satan. Why is Satan even mindful of you? Right? Satan can go right through that wall. He's a spirit being. You can't. I can walk into that wall and hit my head, you know, right? I can't, you know, only if I want to fly, I got to get on a plane. If I want to drive somewhere, I got to get in a car. But he can come and go, as we know from other scriptures. He has a lot of power. You and I are in the flesh. He's spiritual. Why is he mindful of us? Let's go to Job chapter 2. And, you know, in the book of Job, we read about the trials that Job went through. We're just going to read a couple of things here. But in Job chapter 2 and picking up in verse 1, well, why does Satan hate you? Why does Satan hate me? And again, it came to pass on a day that the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. So the reason why I bring this up is even though Satan has lost his position, we know that he is the accuser of the brethren. And what does that mean? You know, you've probably had a sibling like this before. I know I have, right? Maybe I didn't make my bed up. Maybe I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And the other sibling goes to the mom and dad and goes, Ben didn't pick up his clothes, right? Well, and I'm saying that to be funny, but that's exactly what Satan does. He is an accuser of the brethren. So he's walking around and he's hoping you make a mistake. He's hoping you slip. Because as soon as you slip, he's going to tell everybody. That's what he does. Right? Oh, look how easy it would be to rob that bank. Oh, look how easy it would be to rob that bank. You can get away with it. You can get away with it. You can get away with it. You do it. Why did you do that? Right? You shouldn't have done that. And you get mixed signals, and that's how he operates. Well, we go to Job, and he's appearing before God to present himself. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro the earth and from walking up and down it." Now, why is he doing that? Because he's a roaring lion. Because he's trying to find out what he can cause, what problems he can cause, what mischief he can cause. And the Lord said unto Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on earth, a blameless and an upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. And still he is holding fast to his integrity, although you moved me against him to destroy him without cause." And in verse 4, "And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin? Yeah. All that a man has, he will give for his life." Now, we know the story of Job. Over the years, we've looked at the trials of Job and how Satan was like, just let me do this and he'll curse you. Let me take his money away. Let me ruin his family and he'll curse you. And we know, what did Job do? Job didn't fall for it. He didn't fall for it. And that is so hard. That is so hard because Satan knows the buttons to push, right? He'll do a lot of different things. He knows what he's doing. He's really good at it. It's just not a good thing he's doing. So, Satan is being taught in the story of Job the results of envy. Because he's actually seeing with Job that he's wrong. That there are some people that are so focused on following God's way that if you take all they have away from them, they still are going to follow God. You can take their family away. You can take their spouse away. You can take their job away. You can take whatever you want to take away from them, but they're still going to follow God. Now, there's not a lot of those type people. We have to make sure that we are those type people. And that's a lot easier said than done. And we know we're going to slip, but when we slip, the real test is how quick we get back up and get back on track. And those are the things that we have to focus on. Let's go over to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 30. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 30. So it's not about if you're going to slip or if you're going to make a mistake. We know we're going to. But the real question is how quick do we acknowledge it? And how quick do we get back on path? Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 30. A sound heart is like is life of the flesh, but envy, the rottenness of the bones. And that's what Satan was. The rottenness of the bones. So what does that mean? It's talking about the foundation. Right? You build a house on a poor foundation, it can be the most beautiful house in the world, but eventually it's going to crumble. You have to have solid roots. Some people say, you can say foundation. We know the parable, I didn't write this down, but about the seed falling on the good land and what have you. Foundation is everything. What are you rooted in? Why are you doing the things that you do? And so this is something for us to be aware of. In the insurance business, if I ever try to insure a house that was built before 1940, I have to ask a lot of questions. And I had someone ask me one time to insure their house that they bought, and it was built in 1929. And I was just like, I almost didn't even want to take the phone call. But they had completely gutted this house, practically just rebuilt the whole house. And so there was all these different documents I had to get from this individual to be able to insure it, and he was able to provide them, and he was able to be insured. But you think about that, one day you and I are going to stand before God, and he's going to look at our foundation from top to bottom. And there's nothing that you can hide from him. He knows everything that you know and even more. And so we got to make sure that we don't have envy. Over just a few more in Proverbs, still in verse 14, drop down to verse 35, it says, the king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him who causes shame. Who causes shame. Think about that. Everything that God has created was created for a purpose. Every little detail. That means you and I have a purpose. And we do have a purpose, and a lot of times we can't figure it out. In other words, everything was created to serve in some capacity. And I know some people will get caught up on one day I'm going to be in the kingdom and I'm going to be a king or I'm going to be this. And that's exactly what the apostles did on the last night when Christ gave the bread and the wine. You remember? They argued about who was going to sit on his right hand. That is not an argument that you and I ever need to have. We're not concerned about what our position is going to be. We are concerned about the fact that he is going to give us one. And whatever it is, whether it's you just opening the door, the fact that you're in the kingdom is the win. It doesn't matter if you're opening the door. It doesn't matter if you're walking people out of the door. The fact you're in his kingdom means you're a winner. And that's all that really matters. We have a purpose. In other words, everything that was created to serve in some capacity. And I don't know what my capacity will be one day, and I don't know what yours will be one day. But the key is making sure that you're there, making sure that you're part of that kingdom. If we deny what we were created to be, or we deny our role, then we cause great shame to ourselves and great shame to the kingdom of God. You think about it, that's exactly what Satan did. He created or caused shame to the God family. He was created for a purpose. But yet he thought he knew what his purpose was. And he tried to put himself over God. And for that, he lost his position ultimately. He was kicked out of the kingdom. You and I can compare this in a family. You have a father, you have a mother. And from time to time, when my parents were alive, my dad would tell me to do something, and I would think, oh man, he's lost it. Why? I don't need to do it that way. Then I'd have to remember, oh man, honor your father and mother. And I would have to do what he asked me to do. It's because that role you have to learn to follow before you can learn to lead. And that's hopefully what we have to learn how to do. Because of envy, Satan lost his position. We have to be content with what we've been given. We have to never forget how blessed we are. The fact that you're here today on God's Sabbath. Most people don't recognize this day. You have to be thankful for that. It's a blessing. You think about that for a moment. When Lucifer was created, God made him perfect for the role he had. But instead of being the best at that particular role that he was designed for, he wanted a different. And we don't know all the details of what took place. We just know that he got kicked out of the family, as you would say. You think about it. If Satan would have been successful in his revolt against God, think about that for a moment. When Satan attempted to overtake God's kingdom, if he would have been successful, what might be different here today? First of all, we know that this took place before man was created, so there's a very good chance that there would never have been a creation of human beings. You think about that for a moment, that means that none of us would have ever existed. He might not understand, but at some point, he would become unhappy. You ever see someone that achieves something that they want? It's really not something they were meant to achieve. They achieve it, and then they're not happy. They're really miserable. They might be some of the wealthiest people in the world, but they're miserable, right? Because they don't really have a purpose. They don't know what they're doing. They're just floating around. And you think about that, even if Satan would have won, he probably wouldn't have been very happy. He might have not understood why he wasn't happy, And we're thankful that God did win. But if you ever catch yourself depressed or not happy, it could simply be that deep down inside, you know you aren't walking the path that God intended you to walk. Satan is not a happy spirit being. But he made his decision. He turned his back on God. And he'll have to pay for that. And the beautiful thing about you and I is that we're not in that boat. We have the opportunity to go to God and ask for forgiveness and change our paths because we still have life left, right? Until you take that last breath, you have an opportunity to make things right. Let's go to Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. In Mark chapter 15, we're going to begin reading in verse 8. It said, then a multitude, in verse 8 it says, then the multitude began to shout aloud, urging Pilate to do as he had always done for them. And Pilate answered and said, do you desire to have me to release the king of the Jews to you? For he knew that the chief priest had delivered him up because of what? Envy. Because of envy. So Pilate even could see it. It's clear as day that the Jews wanted him dead, not because he had done anything wrong, but because of envy. Because of envy. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd. Look, you think about that. Satan will stir you up. And that's exactly what they did. They stirred up the crowd, and they begged him to release Barabbas to them instead. And you think about that, and you know about Barabbas. Barabbas was a murderer. You have an innocent man and a murderer. And the people said, release him. And you think about that. They weren't even thinking about their own children from a physical standpoint. Why would you want that back on the streets? You know? But they were stirred up. They weren't thinking straight. We see a prime example of, once again, how envy can make you and I do the most unthinkable things, right? It was the key factor in the death of Jesus. We know that this was ultimately planned from the start, that he was going to give his life because he is the ultimate sacrifice. But still, it's amazing to see that envy was in it. Let's go over to Psalms chapter 35. Psalms chapter 35 and verse 7. And in Psalms chapter 35 and verse 7, we're going to read a few scriptures here. And it says, for without cause they have hidden their net from me. Without cause they have dug a pit for my soul. Let destruction come upon him in a time he will not know, and let his net which he has concealed catch him, and let him fall into destruction. You know, the only way is God's way. If we will allow envy to be our compass, then God will allow you to destroy yourself. When you think about that, how many times people destroy their own self? And they still might not even know that they were the reason or the cause of their own destruction. And one day when they're standing before God the Father, they may say, well, you know, Satan did this or it was this. And God can look you straight in the eye, and what he says you can't argue with, and he can say, no, you did that to yourself. You did that to yourself. And we all have experienced that. We've made mistakes. We've done something. It was like, man, why did I get in this situation? I got in this situation, you did it yourself. You're the only one to blame. That's not all the time, but it has happened. And, you know, when we do that, God will allow your own decisions to destroy yourself. Now, people today, you know what they call that? It's not correct to call it that, but they call it karma. And that's not really karma. It's the law of God. It's the law of God, just like, you know, what goes up must go down. God has put certain laws in place. And there's things that haunt you when you do things you shouldn't do. Revelations chapter 12 and verse 12. I came up yesterday, my daughter was playing this song for me called Karma. That made me put that in there, McKinnon. So Revelations chapter 12, verse 12. And then we kind of look here and it says, and I think I read this a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to read it again. It says, therefore rejoice, you heavens, and those who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. That's to us. So the heavens are rejoicing, but you and I are told, watch out. For the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. It is a short time. Now, this earth, Christ has been gone for over 2,000 years. We understand correctly from the time of the Garden of Eden today, we're in the year 6,000 something, according to the Hebrew calendar. Am I right, Mr. Bogan? Something like that. We say 6,000 years, that's a long time, but it's really not. Not when you're talking about eternity. How much longer will this earth go on before God returns? And we think about the Feast of Trumpets that we celebrate that represents that return. But we read here in Revelations, he has great wrath because he knows he has a short time. You think about someone that's evil. Someone that's evil, and right before they know that they're about to get shut down, right before they know they're about to get busted, so to speak, or get caught or whatever, what do? They take it to a whole nother level. Maybe they kill more people. Maybe they what little thinking that was normal becomes even more destructive, right? You see that in hostage negotiation situations. You see all these shows, as soon as that terrorist thinks that the police are about to come in, he starts killing people. And so they got to do it quick. Well, Satan, that's his spirit. And whenever this comes true and he knows that he has a short time, I don't know if we're already in that. Whenever he knows that he has a short time, pardon the language, all hell is going to break loose on this earth. And we can read about it. It talks about the moon turning to blood. It talks about the foundations of the earth shaking, the stars falling, this many percentage of people dying from pollution and pestilence and this, that, and everything. And it says if God didn't return, that we would wipe ourselves completely off the face of the earth. It's like a mass suicide. We're not there yet. We can be thankful for that. We're not there yet. But we know that Satan is destructive. But at the same point in time, Satan is going to realize at some point, and it's this point, that he is going to realize that his plan A, his plan B, his plan C, D, E, F, that all the plans that he had to derail God the Father's plan have failed. So what's our charge? Let's go to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy and read a few scriptures here. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 3. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 3. If anyone teaches any different doctrine and does not adhere to sound words, even those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and that doctrine that is according to godliness, he is proud and knows nothing. Rather, he has a morbid attraction to questions and disputes over words, from which comes envy, arguments, blasphemy, wicked suspicions. Vain reasonings of men have been corrupted in their minds and are destructive of the truth. Men who believe that gain is godliness. From such withdraw yourself. But godliness with content is a great gain. Withdraw yourself. That's what people of the world do. They get in arguments over stupid stuff. They get in arguments, vain reasonings, as we just read here, morbid attractions, obviously changing the way that God says worship him, doing all of these things and always being able to reason it away because they're intellectual, right? They're really not intellectual. Let's go over to the book of James as well. and read a few scriptures here. James chapter 3. James chapter 3 and verse 13. James chapter 3 and verse 13. It says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him demonstrate his works through good conduct and the meekness of wisdom." Right? Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him demonstrate his works through good conduct and meekness and in wisdom. In other words, practice what you preach, right? Walk that line. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not come down from above. It is earthly, sensual, and what? Demonic. Because where bitter envyings and selfish ambition are, there is dissension and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceful, gentle, reasonable. You have to think about that for a minute, you know? Wisdom from above is pure, it's peaceful, it's gentle, it's reasonable, it's full of mercy and good fruits, impartial, without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. You know, if you have a home of peace, that is a blessing. Anything that's other than this, peaceful, gentle, reasonable, it's not of God, it's demonic. God has given us the Holy Scripture to help us understand our calling and to make our election sure. In the same way, Satan is an example to us. Like, we have this Bible that we can refer to so that we can hopefully live our lives better. But we also have Satan too, that we can look and see, that's why you don't want to go down that road. So, what's our purpose? Why is God mindful of you? And your purpose is to be a part of the family of God, one of his many sons and daughters. You don't hear a lot of people talk about that. People talk about when you go to the heaven, you become an angel. And that is nowhere in the Bible. You will never be an angel. You were made in the image of God. God the Father and Jesus Christ are not angels. They're of the God family. Angels are messengers that they use, that are created for certain purposes. You and I were not created to be an angel. It says we were created a little less for just a little while. But we're made in the image of God. Now, on what scale that is, we really don't know. But what that means is God has two arms. He has two legs. He has a head. We know that Moses saw the backside of God at Mount Sinai. We're made in his image. And, you know, one day we will have a role in his kingdom. But now, today, our role is what? It's to be a light. It's to be a beacon of hope for people that are on this earth. To be someone that people look at and say, I don't really know, but there's something different about him. Or there's something different about her. Maybe you're kind. Maybe you open the door for someone. Maybe you actually listen to someone when they tell you that they're having a bad day without judging. Don't ever forget, God made Satan a beautiful angel. We talked about that earlier. Beautiful angel. Made him this beautiful angel. But you kind of overlook that. How beautiful is it that you were made in the image of God? I would say it's more beautiful than being created as Satan was created. I believe that was one of the things he had a problem with. He wasn't made in the image of God. We were. And that was a tough pill for whatever reason for him to swallow. But instead of being a part of the team, He chose to try to take over the team. And he made a bad decision. We have to make sure that we don't make that bad decision because we are made in the image of God. Think about that. That is so big. And it's so, and it's all the way back in the beginning of the book in Genesis. And it's something that you'll just read right over. They say, let us make man in our image. Not only does it prove that there were two, let us make man in our image. That is huge. The fact that every time you see another human being, you're looking at the image of God. Right? And there's a lot of variety there. You know, we've got different races. We got short people, tall people, right? We got a lot of different variety, but they're all made in the image of God. That's the most beautiful thing. That's the most beautiful gift that God has probably ever given, was the fact he made you in his image. You think about that. Because one day, when you're resurrected or you're changed in the twinkling of an eye, you will then be a son or daughter of God the Father. You'll be a part of that family. And then you'll find out what your purpose is from that point forward. And, you know, I'll end with this. We have to make sure that we make our calling and election sure. Because one day when we're standing before God the Father, he has to make a decision that will last for all of eternity. You and I have never had to make a decision. We make a decision on something, and if we find out it's a bad decision, we say, oh, no, we ain't going to do that. We'll change to this. God the Father one day is going to make a decision about each and every one of us and each and every one of the people that have ever been alive on this earth. And that decision has got to last for all eternity. And that decision will be what? Whether or not that person will have eternal life. Because he can't give it to you and then take it away from you. Right? So he has to make a decision that lasts forever. So we need to do a better job of making our decisions count while we're here on this earth. Don't forget what your purpose is. Don't forget, why is God mindful of you? It's because you're made in his image. His creation is all around you. Acknowledge it. He actually made it for you to admire. That's a beautiful thing. That even should make your head even get bigger. You look at the sunset, the pretty skies and different things like that, you go, man, that's beautiful. Do you ever say, he just made that for me? He made that so I could see it. Maybe it's a shooting star. Maybe you look up and you see a certain constellation. He made that for you. That's how important you are, and that's also why Satan hates you. That's why he's full of envy against you. Make sure you make your calling and election sure. Hope you have a good rest of the Sabbath, and see you after services.